So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for attending Lessons Learned from Singapore's Cellular Agriculture Sector. I'm so thrilled to be able to be hosting this session and to be able to have set it up in partnership with Big Idea Ventures. So big thanks to everybody at Big Idea Ventures for helping out. This is really, really exciting. There's a special place in my heart for Singapore companies in Singapore, so I'm really looking forward to this. The first thing I want to do is just ask everybody who's not a speaker to go ahead and mute. If there's time at the end, we'll definitely open everything up for questions. And if you have a burning question in the meantime, go ahead and throw it in the chat. And if we have time or it seems appropriate, I'll definitely try to incorporate it into the discussion. Also, as I said, this is being recorded. It will be up on the YouTube channel, Evolve.ag's YouTube channel in the morning. And so let's begin. So in December, headlines were made when Eat Just's cellularly grown chicken nuggets were served at a Singaporean restaurant called 1880. And since then, there's been a flurry of activity around cell-based agriculture around the world. So one example was in Israel when Yahoo made headlines by being the first head of state to try out cell-cultured chicken from Aleph Farms. Recently, Blue Nalu, a San Diego-based company, has raised over $60 million in funding and announced that. And this is also now supported by studies in Singapore and in Spain that found that public perception of cultured meat is really favorable. In Singapore, over 78% of the people polled said that they would try cultured meat, and in Spain, that percentage was over 40%. So I'd have to say, cultured meat, cellular agriculture, however you want to call it, we'll definitely be calling it by all names throughout this discussion, is really starting to take off. And it's even estimated that by the year 2040, over 35% of all the meats eaten in the world will be from cultured meat sources. So today I'm really excited to present to everybody some of the pioneers in cellular agriculture from Singapore. So I'd love to kick things off with just a quick round of introductions. We've got 5 amazing panelists today, and I think it would be great if you could all just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the company or companies that you're working with, and yeah, we'll get started right there. Sandhya, do you want to go first?
Okay, sure. I wasn't sure if you're going to call out or we just take turns. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Thanks, Wendy, for inviting us and having us here. I'm Sandhya Sriram, the CEO and co-founder of Shiok Meats. And my background is I'm actually a stem cell scientist by training and education, but kind of went into the business role for a while with A-Star, also a serial entrepreneur. This is my 3rd company. I just have a strong passion for saving the planet and working on environmentally sustainable technologies. So kind of put my skill for science and love for food together at Shiok Meats. And Shiok Meats is actually a cell-based seafood company where we produce shrimp, crab, and lobster using stem cells, which is better for the environment, better for animals, and for human health.
Great. Vin, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Vin. I'm the founder and CEO of Gaia Foods. We are a Singapore-based cultivated red meat company, and our focus is on beef, pork, and lamb. And why we're focusing on red meat is mainly because of the extreme environmental damages it causes when it's during its production cycle. And also, Asia is responsible for almost like 40% of the red meat consumed, and we are here to give real meat option for Asian consumers. And about myself, I'm a scientist like Sandhya by training. I have been in Singapore for all my PhD and postdoctoral fellowship. I have extensive experience in muscle stem cell biology. And I'm trying to use my technical understanding and expertise in order to bring the industry to a mainstream idea. So any questions, please, happy to take it. Thank you.
Fengru and Max, you guys want to go next?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Fengru. I am the CEO and co-founder with Max. My background was actually in tech. I used to work for tech companies Salesforce and Google. We started this company 2.5 years ago, and really TurtleTree was back then the first company in the world to be able to use cell-based technology to produce real milk. And our technology allows us access to all types of mammalian milk, goats, sheep, camels, cows. And our work these days really focus around human milk, and we can dive a lot deeper into that later.
Awesome.
Hi everyone. My name is Max Roy. I'm the co-founder and chief strategist. My background is in the executive space. I ran a tech company in the Bay Area for more than 15 years. And a few years ago, I made the leap and really wanted to participate in leading a company that can make a major impact on the sustainability side, feeding the world in a more sustainable way, and doing something about animal cruelty. So I'm very proud to have an amazing team, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Matthew?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really excited for this discussion. So I'm Matthew, and I'm the food scientist at Be Ventures. So what I really do is I love to help food startup companies to look at how we can help them to resolve their technical challenges. So a bit about Be Ventures. So we are a company, and our mission is to solve the world's biggest challenge by supporting the world's greatest entrepreneurs. So we do aim to have, trying to aim to have 100 companies in our portfolio. And we are a global venture capital firm with an accelerator in Singapore and New York. And we invest in the world's most compelling plant-based, cell-based, and any companies that fall within the alternative protein companies. Happy to be here, and let's keep on the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Like I said, I'm absolutely thrilled that I have the 5 of you on today to talk about cell-based agriculture. So as I said, Singapore made headlines last December, and you all have the inside scoop. You all are working on this, topic very hard and for a while now. So how did Singapore become the first country in the world to improve cellular agriculture? Any panelists want to give it a shot?
I think, listen, if I can jump in, I think it comes out of necessity. I think being an island nation, food security has always been an issue. And at one point it was water that was a big issue, and they tackled that head on, because I think they understand this is something that they need to take leadership on for their people. And now it's a food situation, and it's been highlighted by COVID. We've seen how the breakdown of the supply chains can affect countries and economies. So this is something that I know Singapore took a lead on even before the pandemic, but I think it's going to pay dividends for the country and for its people. So that being said, they've also aligned all of the regulatory bodies, the financial systems, the investors, everybody behind these goals. And that's kind of how they drive this. This amazing, highly efficient country can actually get to those goals.
I think to echo on with Max, I think Singapore is known to do these things very well. They have a long-term vision, but they have a solid 5-year plan in place, and they put all of the actions that they can within the 5 years. I think one of the key reasons for seeing an exponential growth in cell-based technology and even plant-based technology in Singapore just within the last 2.5 years, as you can see, is just amazing, right? It doesn't happen anywhere else. And like Max said, only in this country, or you can model this country where the regulatory bodies are aligned with the private and the public sector and what the consumers want. And as the survey that we did, I mean, you mentioned this, the consumers are excited and wanting this product as well. Everybody's thinking about food and thinking about where their food comes from, how it's made, and COVID just accelerated all of that. For a country that imports 90% of our food, I think food safety and security was on everybody's minds. And Singapore put its foot down and said, let's do something about it. Let's invest in it. Let's support it. Let's make it like the hub for APAC, for food tech. And that's exactly what they've done in less than 2.5 years of setting this mandate. And I think they're going to do a lot more in the coming years.
Yeah, and to add to that, I must give kudos to the Singapore Food Agency. They really have a great focus to work with the startups, the businesses to make this happen. So I've got SFA on WhatsApp. These people work super closely with us. Try getting the FDA on WhatsApp with you. And these SFA folks, they even have an industry group within the regulatory body to work with novel food tech companies. So they really are driven to make this happen for all of us.
And I guess ESG and EDB also, Enterprise Singapore and Economic Development Board. Yeah, both of them are in line as well. I mean, again, like Fengru mentioned, which regulatory body will be on an email, like a call away on a WhatsApp chat or, whatever it is. And same applies to these governing bodies that literally we can go back to them and say, hey, I'm facing this issue. Can you help me? And within 5 minutes, you get a reply from them. Either they tell you, yes, we can help you, or they'll be like, let me find out, let me find if somebody else can help you in that angle. So, yeah.
That's
yeah, maybe for me to jump on as well is, I do agree with Fengru and Sandhya, because we also work very closely with the government bodies. And I was quite amazed that they allowed to give you the WhatsApp number and you can really text them if you have really small questions about some small assistant that you need some contact. They really go all the way out to help you to get that contacts. And I would say the structure of how they have built in different agencies together is very organized. Even though you have no idea who you want to approach, they are managed to give you some context and directions for you to work on. So I guess Singapore is really in a way that is not being just organized, it's also very supportive to companies, especially in the Southeast category where they really need a lot of supports and a lot of supports in all these governments, and also a lot of approval from the consumers, where government is trying to educate the consumers as well, so that they won't be so overwhelmed by different cell-based and plant-based products in Singapore.
That's really incredible. I mean, the fact that you all have used the words, organized, structured, they're there within 5 minutes to respond to you when we're replying, discussing with the government. That's something I think people in America and probably a lot of other places wish it would happen. And I mean, Singapore's always been known as being so technologically forward, but it's just really incredible to hear the efficiency and, the technology they're applying to the support to get all of these initiatives kind of moving forward. So that's really great to hear. I'm curious, what kind of regulations does the Singapore Food Agency have for when it comes to regulating cellular agriculture? What are the things you have to make sure you're doing to get things pushed through?
It's the 4 main pillars. I can take this. It's the 4 main pillars. First is the cell line. So they want to know how you made the cell lines, where do you get it from? Is it bought from a company, or have you isolated it on your own? Where's the stem cell bank? How do you store it? So everything about the stem cells, what stem cells they are they muscle, fat, connective tissue, IPS, or induced pluripotent cells or embryonic cells, and all of that. Second is the media, which is the nutrient, liquid nutrient that we feed the cells. So they do want to know what are the ingredients inside. Of course, if you want to keep it a trade secret, they are going to keep it confidential. So they're not going to publish the information, but they do want to know the quantity, the concentration, what goes into it, and all of it. If it's food grade, let's say 70% of your media is food grade ingredients, as long as you use food ingredients that have already been approved and consumed by humans for many, many years, it'll be approved almost immediately. But let's say 30% is still some sort of a recombinant protein or growth factor or something like that. You just have to let them know the concentration. And if a protein is being used that's been produced, genetically engineered or recombinant, you need to show that the final product doesn't have it anymore, or if it has it, does it affect, growth and so on. So that's kind of their take. The third is they do want to know your manufacturing process. In fact, they actually say, submit your flow plans to us even before you start setting up manufacturing, not because we want to stop you or, delay you, but because we can come and let you know, hey, that's a red flag. So why don't you go and think about it a little more, or we can give you a suggestion. This is great, right? You're spending multi-million dollars to set up this plant. And let's say you set it up and then submit all your flow plans and they say, this is a big no-no. And then you go back and spend another $1 million to correct it. So they want to be involved very, very early on. That's kind of their play. And I think it works well for us. And they're not the kinds to delay you. That's the thing. They want to support and help you actually accelerate faster. So that's kind of their thing. And then the fourth is the final product. So they want to know everything about the nutrition, like what's the protein content? Is it different from conventional meat? So they do want you to do a comparison, because if it's too high or too low in any nutritional component, you should have a justification as to why. As long as it's similar, yes, it's great, because these are questions that consumers ask as well. What's the nutritional, content of these meats, and how are they very different, or so on. So these are the 4 main things. But of course, there's a lot under that. but they have managed to very well articulate this and put it as a regulatory framework on their website that anybody can access. You can just do a Google search for SFA cultured meat or something like that, and it comes up. And as they are learning new things as well, they keep adding on and editing it, which is great. So yeah, but yeah, the rest of you can add on if I've missed anything.
I think one of the things with Singapore is like Sandhya mentioned, like if you all the things that if you have already a process, but let's say you are a startup, you have just starting in the space, they will give you a checklist of things that you are supposed to keep in mind. That's an amazing thing. Like who will tell you like, hey, plan your direction in this manner so that you will not pay a lot of hurdles in the future. I think that's one of the advantages being in Singapore. You just contact SFA, they will really give you a checklist of things that you're supposed to follow so that you know what you're supposed to do. And that makes it much easy for us to go forward in when we are applying for regulatory approval. And I think that's one of the advantages if you are a starting company. Yes, once you started, the things that Sandhya mentioned will definitely come into play. Yeah.
It's a very proactive government, very proactive system, it seems like.
Yeah, and if we can add to that, maybe we can look at the case study from Just Eat. From what we understand, Just Eat completed more than 20 production runs in a 1,200 liter bioreactor to demonstrate a consistent manufacturing process for its cell-based chicken here. And I also believe it is also able to show the SFA that the product met existing poultry industry standards with extremely low and significantly cleaner microbiological content than conventional animal-derived meat. So I think all of these help to get them that approval that they look for.
Makes sense. So I'm curious, there's a roadmap and it sounds like the government's very organized and helping everyone and really being, as organized as they can be, as supportive as they can be. But what are some of the major challenges that you're facing bringing cellular agriculture to market in Singapore?
I think one of the biggest challenges across the world, not just Singapore, is really the cost of this nutrient-dense soup that the cells require for growth. This is traditionally been coming from the pharma industry, and these growth factors have been known to be a few $100,000 per gram. And this, you can imagine, has been a huge issue for some time. And this is something that we've been taking a lead on ourselves. As a matter of fact, most recently we've acquired a technology using a fungi strain that's glyco-engineered to be able to produce these very high value components, these growth factors that are so significant in price, and we can do it at a fraction of the price. These are just some of the things that are going to be required that are a major challenge in the industry. But we can't just wait for the pharma folks or other folks to come in and solve these for us. We have to kind of take the lead on this ourselves if we're going to see our products on the market anytime soon. So I do think that Singapore uniquely is also in a position to take the lead on that. And if TurtleTree can play a major role in that, it will help the entire ecosystem, the entire cell ag space, and that's what we're doing already with some of the other folks that are here already starting to share some of our technology, so we can get that price point down.
Yeah, I think the challenge is generally for the industry and not so much for Singapore. I think, like, again, it's efficient. They have made sure there's space, there's support, there's funding, there's regulatory and so on. But I'm going to take a different type of an approach here, playing the devil's advocate here. But Singapore is so efficient, but it's the smallest market, right? We have just 6 million in population, and that's pretty much it. And we are mostly an affluent population, well-educated population in general, majority of us. But this is not your ultimate market. Your ultimate market are going to be countries like India, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and so on, right? At this point, none of these countries have the regulatory framework. Yes, some of them are working towards it, but none of them are as efficient as Singapore. So Singapore is showing you the best possible outcome, but the other countries are not going to be so easy or as efficient. So for entrepreneurs like us, where we are exposed to a very, very efficient system, we tend to assume that the rest of the world will follow through and it might be the same. But actually, when you go out there, you realize that what happened here you felt like you put in 100% effort, but it would have been just 10% effort. Whereas in the other countries, you have to go 200% to kind of go out there and get that mass scale production as well as distribution. So this is one thing that we have realized. But along those lines, we actually voiced these concerns to Enterprise Singapore. And the thing that Enterprise Singapore has done very well is they have an office in every region. Like they have an ESG Japan, they have an ESG Latin America, they have an ESG in Africa and so on. And what they do is they have people stationed there who are mostly from Singapore or locals there. And they actually help you try to penetrate the market. So all you have to do is ask, and they will start opening up doors for you. And they will start saying, oh, you're looking at Mexico, is it? Come, let's find some people who are interested in you. Come, let's introduce you to investors. Come, let's look at the regulatory framework. Shall we work together in speaking to the regulators? This is how they do it. So, we have to support again for that as well, even though it's going to be super hard to get into the other countries.
Interesting, and one of the questions that was asked is it conceivable Singapore could export more proteins than it consumes one day? We don't even have to export the protein itself to make a major impact. The technology, I mean, listen, Singapore is known for being a tech hub. There's significant IP and tech around a lot of this work. And I think it could eventually be, and when it comes to the milk side, I can imagine in a very strange situation where Singapore can be the major exporter of dairy technology someday, the future of dairy tech. So I think that's where you'll see a lot of the value that Singapore is creating is a know-how and an IP that's being created around the space. And the future of food could be very well in Singapore in those regards.
And to your point about exporting the technology too, I think, a lot of the ideas around new food tech is to really have local foods that are created and built, cultured in those places, whether it's a vertical farm or self-cultured meat or anything like that. So I think definitely taking the technology that all of you folks are working on and being able to replicate it in different countries is probably more of a logical use of that technology rather than exporting it, unless you're exporting it, right across the border to Malaysia or something like that, where it's easy to do, in local food miles. But other than that, I think it's really the technology that is, conceivably going to be transferred across borders.
Yeah, and to add to that, the actual production of alternative protein, of cell egg products, actually do require quite a large amount of water usage and energy usage. As I was sharing on the chat, I was on a panel with Minister Chan Chun Sing a few weeks ago, and he shared that the amount of power that is required to produce 30% of the country's nutritional needs, which is our goal, would far exceed what Singapore can produce in terms of energy at the moment. So if we want to do that, we might need to think about powering from Australia's renewable energies, pulling a giant wire all the way across the ocean. That is something the government is actually thinking about, but technology-wise, we do need to build the right infrastructure to do that. So we could produce a lot of protein, but all these different upstream requirements we would need to think about as well. What goes into growing these cells? What are the raw materials needed? Where do we get the water and power? So all of that would need to be considered before we can produce enough to feed Singapore and then think about exporting. So I think echoing Max's point, it would make more sense to export the technology rather than the actual product itself.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I think one thing I was going to mention is for people who don't know, Singapore is a city-state. It's extremely small country, which is around 700 square meter overall size. It doesn't make, the cost of energy and cost of infrastructure is much more on the higher side here because of all other reasons, but it doesn't make too much sense for exporting things out of Singapore. But technology-wise, that's the strength of Singapore. We can develop technology and export technology. We don't have to be the global manufacturing hub, and Singapore does not have the infrastructure and also ecosystem to support that kind of a measure. But we can definitely support the technology development. That's where Singapore's strength comes into picture. And I think we will focus on that aspect much more vigorously rather than being a manufacturing hub here.
That makes sense. So I'm curious about some of the regulations when it comes to food safety. Are there particular things that the Singapore Food Agency is looking for, or that you definitely have to keep top of mind as you produce these, everything from the growth factors all the way through to the final product?
I think for them, the main concern is because we use very less or no antibiotics to make sure that the microbiological content is less. But one thing is we won't be able to grow the meats if there's virus or bacteria growing inside of the bioreactor. The cells, they will just take over the cells and you won't have any meats left. That's kind of what it is. So, but they do need safety testing. And this is something that you're supposed to do even on a routine basis in the laboratory as well. It's just something that we as scientists keep doing. And of course, as we grow cells in the bioreactor, we do. Singapore is not against GM. They are actually very open, as you might have seen in Possible Foods this year. We have other products as well. But of course, if it's GM, you have to give the right paperwork, submit what it is, if the final product has a genetic modification or not, or it was done early on, and maybe the final product doesn't have it. So it's mostly on those, and they do worry about packaging and storage. Again, Singapore is so efficient with its energy and power sources that we literally don't have any power shortages or anything here, right? And if it happens, it's such a big thing, it comes in the news, even if it happens for like 5 minutes. But if you go to countries like India, it is getting harder and harder, even though we are improving on our energy sources. You have to think about even coming to the Pfizer vaccine. India decided not to go for it because it is a -80 storage. And most of the logistics in India don't work that way. So instead we went for the AstraZeneca. We found a modified version of this Pfizer in India so that it can be stored at room temperature or at 4 degrees, which kind of works. So we have to think about all of this, that Singapore is like the top most efficient, but you go out there, what type of packaging can you use? Which regional sectors do you want to set up in for distribution to regional markets? And like you mentioned, I don't want to produce in Singapore and ship to the US. Makes no sense as a sustainable food company. So all of this, they do look into all of this, not that they govern it, but they can advise you based on their experience that they have. Yeah.
That makes sense.
From the regulator point of view, one thing Singapore is a very unique position is because we don't have any lobby group here, or visible ones at least. So that makes it so much easy for us to put our idea across and see what's best for the community and people. That plays a much bigger role rather than interest groups and lobby groups. And this is what Sandhya was mentioning earlier, that hey, we are in a very unique and very advantageous situation in Singapore. And our problem starts coming in when we go outside of Singapore, because there we have a completely different ball game to play. It's not like, oh, we just go to the government and speak and get the things done. We have to find a committee to push to the government, and that takes a lot of time, energy from each and every company. And hopefully we can convince other governments that Singapore model is pretty decent. It's not a bad thing for anyone to follow, and they can build upon this. You don't have to like just copy Singapore model, but you can build upon your local setting and local requirements. That makes a much bigger impact rather than interest groups, which are known to have of course, interest groups are interest groups. So like we are all seeing this kind of different opinion about meat, like cultured meat cannot be called as meat. It has to be called as fake meat. All this weird things coming into play. When you look into the reality, it has no meaning, but that's how regulation works. So you have to be aware of all those things, especially when we go out of Singapore. But if you are coming into Singapore, directly go to the government. Don't even have to speak to any of other people. So that's the advantage sitting in Singapore for us.
And that leads to my next question is, how are you required to label cellular agriculture in Singapore? In the US, for example, there's been a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of different points of view, but where has that conversation landed in Singapore?
So when we asked this question to SFA, they were like, as long as you can let consumers know that it's not normal meat, we are okay. Or not conventional, sorry. So we said, can we use cell-based? Can we use cultured? Can we use cultivated? They were like, yeah, as long as you are able to articulate that on your packaging and inform consumers if they're eating in a restaurant that it is, made from cells or using this new technology, they are okay with it. But I think I just saw something from the US side, I think from the alliance that a couple of cell-based meat companies had formed, that they have found out that the consumers wanted to be called cell cultured meat. They put that together. I know GFI kept changing their terms and now they've settled on cultivated, if I'm not wrong. I think we're just loosely using it for now. We have been speaking to India and Japan and Korea as well. Korea and India are very early, so they're not really thinking about labeling at this point, rather than what is this product and let's look at the technology. Japan looks like it might follow something like cell culture as well. I mean, what the Japanese term equates to is something like cell culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think labeling wise, we are pretty fluid in Singapore still. And we don't really have to, as Sandhya mentioned, as long as we have some information out there saying that how it was produced or what kind of meat is it, that should suffice the general public and also the regulatory framework. We have to worry about other countries. Singapore is pretty stable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to your point, Vin, the lack of these lobbyists in Singapore allow us to have a real conversation that's focused on the product and what the product is, instead of trying to worry so much about what the lobbyists think and so forth. So I think that's played a major role. Labeling wise, I think we're going to have a lot more friendliness here in Singapore than we will in the US for the time being. I mean, we've seen similar issues in Europe as well, where they crack down pretty hard on labeling of plant-based products even. So I think Singapore will be a lot more friendly. But for ourselves, I think we've even been able to get some feedback, and I think the latest ISO standards allow us to call our milk proteins a natural milk protein, natural product. That's really amazing. That's huge in the space. So I think definitely APAC in general is going to be a good place to be.
That's wonderful. It's great to hear that that's not the issue there, and you guys are not having any issues with how you market this and promote it. We had a tangential question come up that I think would be really interesting to address, and it's, does SFA release summaries or public information about the specific food risk assessments? Have they or will they release any information about the review of the Just Eat Chicken?
I don't think they ever will. I don't think it's fair to ask as well, right? Because that is proprietary information to Just. But what they do, so what we did as a company is we got in touch with, we do a bi-monthly call with SFA or something like that. So, but we did one immediately after Just Chicken was approved. And we knew it was coming. We had to keep quiet about it, but we knew it was coming. And then once it came out, we actually got on a call with them. And we asked them, like, how long did it take? What was the issue, or were there any issues, and stuff like, what did you look into? What was the paperwork that Just submitted? And we did the same with Josh at Just as well. So we went and asked him, like, what did you submit? What was your experience like? And so on. One thing that we do know, I think Josh has spoken about this quite openly, is it didn't take them just the 3 to 6 months. It took them much longer than that because they were the first company to do it. SFA was learning how they want to regulate it. The company was learning what paperwork is required, especially being a US company where they did a lot of their runs in the US and then eventually did it in Singapore. There was a bit of difference in the way you look at things or the way you do paperwork, right? So there was a lot of back and forth, but Josh did tell us, and SFA told us the same, that they kept so close in touch that every 2 weeks they used to get on a call or a quick message and say, this is where we are, this is the issue that we have, or this is what's progressing. And it's not like you submit and then you forget about it and you don't know where you are with it. They came back with regular updates saying, this is what we're looking into right now. This is the review panel that we have put together for this part of the paperwork and stuff like that. So I think that's more than enough information for us at this point. There are some confidential things that I can't mention here, but we do know what exactly SFA is coming in with and what Josh and Just faced. And you just have to be practical about it. If a regulator is willing to just talk to you and approve a product, that itself is such a big step. that you just go with the flow. And yes, and the regulator has every right to ask you any amount of studies or analysis or paperwork to do, because at the end of the day, they care about consumer safety. And we as a company care about that as well. It is a food product that people are going to put in their mouths, digest and eat. It's going to be part of their lifestyle. It has to be safe. It's not something that you eat once a year. Yeah.
So what advice would you all give to companies and governments even who are working on cellular agriculture to help speed up the regulation process and get these in front of consumers, sooner than later?
I'd say take a look at how things are being done in Singapore, try to learn from it, and understand that, I would say, understand that this is not hurting your existing economy. As a matter of fact, if you can adopt these methods, you might spur a whole new economy. You might spur a whole new type of business. It might create a significant number of jobs. So this is where I think the existing lobbyists in other parts of the world are kind of suppressing government's efforts and kind of not allowing them to have opportunities like this. For example, if Singapore takes the lead on this and some of these other folks don't, they may end up being importing the technology that Singapore is creating. And actually lose a lot more in the long run. So I think that other countries should take a look at how things are happening, innovate as well, work closely with startups, and think more for the country, their own countries, than just the lobbyists.
Yeah. Sorry, Vin, go ahead. Go ahead, Vin.
Sorry. Yeah. One thing I can add for governments especially is use a common sense law, not a interested law. That makes regulation so much easier. And you keep interest of the public in mind, not any other thing. Like you can just tap into your other departments in your government, like go to your health sciences department, ask them what are the questions I need to ask them. Like, hey, they are bringing a product which is a byproduct or a tangential of the biomedical industry. Do you have any role to play? You can just ask around in the government sector. That plays a much bigger role. And common sense law can go much longer way than people assume. It is really underestimated how much common sense law can go far. So I think that's the thing. You tap into other parts of the government, because at the end of the day, we are using a lot of technology which is from the biomedical industry. So, and most government has a lot of understanding about how to regulate a biomedical side of things. So you can bring a little bit of that, not the whole set of things. You don't have to do clinical trials and all, but a little bit of understanding of regulation can be brought from other industries as well.
I think it has to be a combined effort of startups, the investors, the private and the public sector together. It can't be just one. Again, depends which country you want to enter and how strong the traditional conventional meat/seafood/dairy industry is there. And most of these are politically connected. So you have to kind of look into it. So you have to do a deep dive and understand how it works before you go out there and say, I have a better product and yours is not good. And this is where I'm coming in and disrupting. I think the way to do this is rather speak to these companies, have a conversation with them. Honestly, we have had really good experiences. We assume that the seafood industry is very closed off and traditional, and this is what we have heard always. But when we reached out to them, and we have seen, companies like Thai Union invest into plant-based seafood, which is totally different for them. And Thai Union is the largest producer of shrimps and crustaceans almost in APAC. So actually, when you go out there and speak to them, they are open to understanding. They may not, accept you immediately, but it is a long process. I don't think, we are all at an early stage right now. We are not at the mass distribution scale, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. So it's a good time to start penetrating those industries and the market and see how your investors, your advisors can support you in that angle. So it's not just one company going after the industry and saying, my product is better, your product is bad, and stuff like that. Instead, why don't we say, the population is going to be 10 billion. We need a lot more protein. All of us are struggling with producing so much protein. Here's another technology that we can work together on. And these are the larger players that are eventually going to support us in the future, right? So that's the play I have. And I've seen a lot of other cell-based meat companies look at that as well. And we're all having this common mission of sustainable food for the entire world, not for a specific sector of people or not only for the rich or anything like that. We want our products to be there for everybody to eat, everybody to enjoy. everybody to walk into a supermarket and get a bag or a box of it. So I think coming from that angle, what's effectively worked for us is putting our forces as a company, but also speaking with other cell-based meat companies to see if we can do it together, speaking with our investors in various regions, speaking with the regulatory bodies and the ESG's offices in different countries as well.
That's an incredible collaborative effort. And I think, yeah, especially because this is such a brand new technology, you know, there's not a lot of information out there. So it's really great to hear that there really is a collective among the companies that are working on this. And, you know, the goal is not necessarily, to your point, to say, oh, we are the best, but no, we're all in this together to help feed the world. Dr. Zhao, did you want to add anything? I know you're working with a handful of different companies. I'm sure you talk to a lot of different governments in your day-to-day too. So I'd love to hear if you had an opinion on this too.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. I guess what Sandhya has covered is really a lot. It's really more on how company works together as a whole. So they can't depend on just like the government bodies in Singapore or any countries to get answers out of it, because they do have to ask around and see how they can get more insights and stuff. So for my case is South-based company, yes, they do ask within their other different companies here to understand how they can create the cells and what's the regulatory issues. But I would say that some of the companies, they also go another level to look at the food side, because eventually all the the cultivated cells has to turn into the end product, which is a food consumer products. But this is the area that you have to think about what other different companies you can work with to incorporate this, to bind your cells together to get the right texture, the flavors, the nutrition, as well as the shelf life as well. So I think these are the different areas that a lot of companies are looking into, not just to focus on the regulatory portion, but they do have to see that at the end of the consumers are the one to see the product, the packaged product in the retail or in the restaurants. They won't be able to understand how the cells is. So the regulatory point of view is trying to ensure all the cells are safe for the consumer. But for the company's point of view, yes, they do have to work with different entities, different companies to ensure the product is tasty. Because if the product is not tasty, I would say the consumer will not even dare to buy the product, or they wouldn't want to try or repurchase the product again. So I guess the regulatory portion has really covered the food safety aspects. So they do have to understand a bit more about the consumer point of view and how they can get something that is tasty, not just tasty itself. The education of the consumer is very important, because cell-based, cell-cultivated, these are all terminologies that for us, we are very familiar with. But if you were to ask some random consumers out there, they probably would think of, is it something like from the sci-fi show that you create more cells from labs and stuff like this? So there's a lot of things that we have to think about as a whole. And I'll guess that the first step, the government has really assured that in terms of regulatory, they have a lot of structured guidelines and ensure that if they were to claim this as a cultured meat, it's safe for consumption, and that's nothing going to happen to you when you consume it. So I think this is something that we are very fortunate that everything is set in stone. But I would say all this effort comes in very nicely with all the companies willing to work together, not just looking at each of them as competitors, but I love to see how the network they build between themselves, and then to understand and grow together as a whole.
That leads to my last question: is how are you convincing consumers to try out cellular agriculture, the different products you all are making?
We haven't had to. There's been so much interest. And so, you know, when we started, this was August 2018, Singapore hadn't announced the food story or the 30 by 30. Singapore wasn't talking anything about food, right? And there was, BIV was just getting started at that point, you know, just getting set up. In fact, we had just spoken to Andrew about it. And it was so new, and being the first company that brought this technology either on the meat or seafood side to Singapore and Southeast Asia, it was so interesting that the consumers were actually excited about it. And they were like, oh, we have heard about this in the US, or we have heard about this in Europe, and we've seen this burger being made by Dr. Mark Post and stuff like that. And then there was this other section of people, they're like, what is cell-based meats? Like, what is the whole thing? So honestly, my team and we've been working so hard on consumer education, and I'm so glad there are more companies right now. You know, when TurtleTree came up, and then Gaia, and then the other companies that have come up, I'm so glad that we are now a full-on force, that, you know, it's not just us trying to educate consumers, but it's 6 or 8 companies that are trying to do it together, but in different ways, that different consumers are getting excited about it. And as you can see from the survey that we did, we actually did this survey early last year. So it did take us a while to like, do the analysis, compile the results, and then eventually publish it. But the thing was the 78% acceptance was after we asked the question to the 850 respondents. We asked them, have you ever heard of cell-based meats? Do you know how it's made? 40% of the 850 said they've never heard or they don't know what it is. So we actually showed them an infographic. We actually educated them as part of the survey. And after that, we asked them that question, would you try or eat it? And from that 40%, we had another 70% say that, yes, we are interested. So we do realize that you have to make it non-sci-fi. It's not really sci-fi. And how I break it down is when you take a piece of meat right now that you get from a cow or a pig, what do you think it's made up of? It's made up of muscle, connective tissue, blood, fats. That's exactly what we are using to grow. We are taking those cells and growing it outside of the animal's body. No need for you to grow the entire animal, feed it plants that humans can eat or other animals could eat. And why wait 5 to 7 years for one cow to grow when you can make it in 5 to 7 weeks and grow only the part that you eat? And then they come back and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's just those simple things that you break down. And I think that's where, effective communication of your technology is so important, where yes, you make it very big and very vast for your investors, but make it very, very simple for your consumers where they relate to it. And food is such a emotional experience, right? People consume food for happiness and joy, and it's such a lifestyle thing that you can't make it sci-fi. It's not pharma, it's not making an organ outside of the human body, it's making food using a different technology, and you just have to be open to educating consumers. So we have realized that very early on, and I'm glad that all the companies are working together. We have sort of got our messaging similarly between the different companies. So that helps. It's not like 8 companies talking 8 different things. So it's nice to see each of us are kind of, well-rounded messaging that's out there for the consumers.
Yeah, I think one of the things we also, we felt really early on is like consumer education. And especially if you have the opportunity, bring them to your facility, because people think if we show like what we are doing, people will get like, oh, scared and all. One of the common feedback we have got from inviting so many journalists and all to our lab is like, oh, this is what cultured meat means. Why is it so complex? It looks so simple. When we break it down into simpler pieces, they absorb it so easily. Because when they see, like, they saw the news, oh, just release it. But no one has any idea what is it, how is it done, or all this kind of things. When journalists came to us, we have no idea. Yes, we know it's a different way of producing meat, but we really don't understand the technology. When we bring them to our lab and explain like, hey, this is what cells look like, this is what we use to grow them, they're like, oh, what's so big deal about it? That's the final conclusion they come out with. Like, why are people so scared about it? And it's not like we messaged it in such a way that we wanted to change their mind. We just break down the technology into simpler pieces and fed them like, hey, this is what we are going to do in future also. And that's one of the very eye-opening scenario for us, because we didn't really think like we do things in a lab on a regular basis. That's a common practice for us. But when we bring in non-scientists or layman term people, they get so excited about seeing everything. And they also break down the barriers like, oh, it's not something like reserved only for some scientists who can do things. Everyone can think and understand what is the technology behind it. And that's the main message we can, we are asking government, can we set up a booth somewhere just to showcase like, hey, this is how things are done. If we can do that, that makes it much more easy for me to explain to the consumer rather than showing some video. Like just is like very good at doing things, but feel and touch has still a bigger role. Yeah, we are all doing a lot of things on internet now, but feel and touch, people like when they go and like see things, that has still a lot of value to it. And I think that plays an important role. So be transparent and tell about like, if just because I show some liquid doesn't mean anyone can copy it. We know our technology, we know what are the secrets we have. So just be open and we keep it transparent. That helps a lot in educating customers.
Wendy,
Sorry, go ahead, Max.
And Wendy, you were talking a lot about the consumer perception and the adoption. Really, I think that this trend is already started. We've been very fortunate that big companies like Impossible and Beyond on the plant-based side started a lot of these big trends. But if you look at it, it's all happening with the consumers that are young. A lot of the young folks, a lot of the kids went through the education system in the US have seen a significant exposure to sustainability and what's happening to the planet and so forth. And this has played a big role into consumer choices. And I don't know that much about Singapore's households, but in the US, kids kind of dominate what goes in your refrigerator. So I think that the young folks and the youth has really has been a big part of this. At the end of the day, we're not going to win over a lot of the older folks who are very traditional. They're all about hey, listen, I got to have my meat and potatoes. I got to get it from a cow, and I got to get it from this butcher. I think that the future is really these young folks who are really driving a lot of these huge new trends. I think it's going to need those type of numbers to really have a sustainable growth, if you think about it. But yeah, Fengru, I'm sorry to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. So we at TurtleTree we have been conducting quite a lot of surveys internally, as well as focus groups. And interestingly, a lot of the consumers care less about how it's made, but more about the functional benefits for each individual. So they actually want to understand how is it better for me? Is it better for my brain development, better for my gut development? And these are the kind of messaging that we can push through to educate people about how these products helps them with their health, especially if they have certain health concerns. In the wake of COVID, immunity is a big challenge. So we're quite fortunate that some of the milk components and milk blends that we are looking at are able to address a lot of these high level concerns of our consumers. And if you look at a regular technology adoption lifecycle, we have three main groups, right? We have the innovators, and then we have the early adopters, and then we have the majority of the people. I guess now we're at a stage where we are crossing between innovators and early adopters, being super excited about all these different technologies, but we need to cross a chasm before we can reach the majority of the people. And that is a bridge that we must be very careful to try to address for the entire cell egg industry. So being able to build customer segments, being able to understand every group of customer from the young to the old to the middle age and what they're concerned about, allow us to build better messaging and better educational content to reach out to every individual in the market.
Yeah, one last point I'll go with. Max mentioned a very interesting thing. Kids do play, not just in US, in major part of the world, kids do play a major role in what goes into the refrigerator. And we ask everyone like, hey, help us convey our message to the young audience first, because they can change much aggressively depending on what kind of solution you're giving. And eventually older folks will follow them, because once they see, like, it has been like, if you take a tech, Facebook was not meant for old people. It was meant for young teenagers and people. They adopted it and it was taken over by old folks. Now young kids don't want to go to Facebook anymore. That's a clear story. Once we convince younger audience, it will eventually, older folks will definitely follow because they see the benefits. Older folks will simply not follow because of like young kids are following, but they see the benefits and they will have no choice. Someone there. Okay, I think it's just someone switch mic on. So I think that should be our main aim as well initially, because young generation people who are growing in schools and also in universities, they will be the one who are going to change the way in which you are going to produce and consume food in future. If we can convince them, I think our game become much easier for going long term with the older population or general population in general.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think you all mentioned really, really important things, from, introducing people to the actual labs where these are grown, to talking about the ingredients, to, really helping the kids understand and the young folk understand why this is so important, why it contributes to things they care about, like sustainability and the environment. So let's hope this keeps going in a positive direction. I think there's so much collaboration between all of you, and then also it sounds like the government, which is great, that I feel like, if this is gonna happen and really become an industry, when it becomes an industry, it's definitely gonna happen there in Singapore. So we had 2 other quick questions. I think these will be very fast, but I'd love to get to the answers to these as well. One is, what is the current shelf life of lab-grown protein?
So for us, it's pretty much similar to conventional shrimp. So if you freeze it, freeze it with a preservative or a natural preservative, it's anywhere between 2 to 3 years. If you do it without a preservative, about a year. This is frozen. If you keep it at room temperature, it does get spoiled. If you keep it in the fridge, it's about 2 to 3 days. So that's the beauty of cell-based meats, is it's as natural as you can get it. It's real meat. So it does get spoiled, which is a good thing. Food should get spoiled, yes, if you don't store it properly. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the same thing for milk. When we talk about milk proteins and so forth, the shelf life is going to be very much the same. So if you're looking at lactoferrin or other types of proteins that are in milk, they're all going to behave and function very, very much in the same way, and also a very similar shelf life.
Great, thank you. Okay, one last audience question is, developing media at scale at low cost is an important factor to commercialize cell-based meat and seems to be on the plan of many cell-based meat companies. What would be the key technological capabilities that a company should have in order to achieve this goal? Or in other words, what are the technological hurdles that companies need to overcome in order to achieve this? And I'll add one more question to this, is what type of education are you recruiting from? Like, what are the skills that you're looking for as far as hiring?
If I can add, if we can talk about the media side of it, I mean, that's something that TurtleTree Scientific has really taken the lead on. That is something we internally are developing along with some partners, and of course other much larger players. So we have another big announcement that we'll be making in the next week or so that adds to our capabilities. What we have to get to is large scale production of this stuff, and being able to do this at a fraction of the price of what it is today to make this a reality. I think we're going to be able to do that. This is a major goal that's been across the industry. I think once again, a lot of the industry folks have been looking at tackling this by waiting for the pharma industry or some of these other players to come out with solutions. That hasn't necessarily happened. And if you look at the business side of it, I don't think it will happen anytime soon. Otherwise, it'll cannibalize their own business. You don't have to go very far to have the same stuff cross back into their bread and butter. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them. But on the cell-based media side, I do believe once again it'll be Singapore that'll take the lead on this side, even though the rest of the world has been working on it.
I think the way we are tackling this is we're doing, of course, in-house research on it. And I think the skill set that you need is anybody who understands cells and media pretty much, and definitely someone with some sort of an industry experience definitely helps. So we do hire people who have done this in the pharma industry so they can bring in their knowledge. It's not rocket science, honestly. It's just thinking out of the box a little bit and seeing what's an efficient efficient way of doing it. So we do sort of swap out the pharmaceutical ingredients with plant-based extracts or protein expression systems and so on. So that's kind of what we do. The other two approaches that has worked very well for us is Integriculture is this Japanese company that has this proprietary technology called the Culnet system. I mean, I'm not going to explain it in detail, but you can go read about it. It's a pretty straightforward system that uses the cell's own ability to produce the proteins and the growth factors, which is what happens inside of the animal's body. They've done it very well for red meat and white meat, and right now we've got some great results for our shrimp and lobster as well. So we're excited about that part. Coming to the pharmaceutical one, so we do have a successful collaboration with a pharmaceutical company, but I'll tell you why it's worked out for us is because, like Max said, yes, the pharma companies, if they had to do it, they would have done it already. They have the bandwidth, they have the expertise, they have the funding for it, right? But the reason they wouldn't do it for red and white meat is they already have existing products that are extremely expensive for the pharmaceutical industry. So they would probably not do it. This is my take, and I think it's what Max said. But what's worked for us is, because we're doing something so unique that the pharma industry has never worked with, shrimp, crab, lobster, and they'll probably never work with it, right? Because nobody does shrimp, crab, lobster research to understand human health. So that was an external source of revenue for them in the future, and an exciting project for them to work with, where they take their expertise from the mammalian side of things and they put it into seafood. And that's where we see a more successful kind of step towards that on the pharmaceutical side. But I'm not really sure it's going to work for red and white meat with the pharma companies, just because they have their own conflict of interests. Yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that, really we don't want to try to reinvent the wheel. Even in the cell culture media side, at TurtleTree we adopt a really open innovation strategy. So we try to find the best technologies that is out there. So as Max mentioned about TurtleTree Scientific, we recently announced that we have a strategic partnership with Dyadic. So Dyadic is a US company, it is a listed company, and they spent the last 24 years engineering their strain of fungi to be able to produce different types of proteins. And as of recently, they have also glyco-engineered the strain to achieve human-like glycan levels, which is really important when it comes to unlocking certain functionalities and applications that are required for the cell media, the growth factors applications. So this Dyadic's platform is able to allow us to access these growth factors at a much lower cost and much higher yields. And it has also in the past been FRAS certified. It's been FDA certified as well. So being able to adopt these existing technologies allow us to accelerate a lot faster.
And Wendy, we can't have experimental, when we get to that level, experimental technologies that we don't know what the cost is going to be. We have to get these prices significantly lower for this to make sense. So that's where I think a lot of these types of technologies that have been proven, but just different applications of it may actually prove to pay dividends.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'll just put a different point here. Like 50 years ago, we had cell science, cell culture. Before that time, we were not using pharma grade materials to grow the cells. We were using animal-based products to grow the cells, which are most natural and you just get from, because animal industry was very wide. We had a lot of other options available. It's just that pharma industry made uniform success in the sense that you can grow a wide variety of cells using a pharma grade materials. That's when we got used to the idea that, oh, that's the best way and that's the only way. If you dig a little deeper, we have multiple ways, or it's just like human body. You need sugars, you need growth factors, you need some vitamins, and you need amino acid protein synthesis. You just have to go and find these materials in all different processes and materials. You can grow yourself in variety of materials. You don't have to stick to the idea that only the pure chemicals that are given by pharma is the only choice to grow cells. We are testing with very crazy items, like we are upscaling some of the waste material. And we are surprised to see like, oh, cells do adapt very easily. They are not like rigid to only grow in some DMEM, which is like only pharma grade material. They can adapt very easily to other materials as well. So if you can keep an open mind and try explore different options, there are multiple ways you can grow the cells. And it's the same thing like humans. Just because you eat burgers doesn't mean you can't adapt to other kind of food in your body. You can easily adapt to other kind of food. And that's what we have to find and give to these cells. They'll be happy to grow in many wide variety of plant-based or fungal-based resources.
That's wonderful. So I just want to give a big thanks to everybody for being a part of this panel and for everybody who joined. I know some of you have to jump off. If anybody wants to stay on, we do have a couple other quick questions if you feel like staying on to discuss them. But I know you all are very busy and starting your day in Singapore. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
have to
Wendy.
drop off. So nice to
Thank
see you
you.
all, and thanks for whoever
Thanks a lot,
attended.
Wendy. Thanks for the session.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Great
so
to see
much.
you guys. Thank you, Wendy.
Everybody. This is so great.
I'll be
Thanks, Wendy.
jumping off. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks.
Take care.